buy from, that's a agreement that you enter into with a owner that would have a system on your site to pay for the energy produced by that system. And we've used it, a single agreement across the entire diocese. We grouped sites by geography and sizing so that they were attractive to developers who were people that were going to come in, construct the systems, and then own those systems afterwards. And then finally, we're able to use some market knowledge and expertise of solar development to enhance the results. My background is that since 2008, I've been involved in the solar industry, and until my involvement with EDSJ in 2019, I had been on the contractor or developer side of the business in developing solar arrays for small businesses and nonprofits and others. This solar development is efficient. It simplifies the process and reduces the diocesan risk. You have one contract across the diocese. Instead, if you do this individually and the sites go out and do their contracting for solar, what you end up with is between 2 and 3 contracts per site, which proliferate pretty quickly and can be expensive, particularly as your chancellor gets involved and you start looking at all of these different contracts. And that's the contract to construct the system, the contract to own it and manage it, and or entering into an O&M contract, which is operations and maintenance time. The individual sites and the diocese, for that matter, are not responsible for the build. So the developer has to get it done, which is an important concept here, whereas if you enter into a construction contract, you're on the hook. It also controls development costs and risks. We had a process through which we have the developer and the contractors go that minimizes any surprise costs. And if there's any cost come up at the end, those are on for the account of the developer. So you don't have circumstances where, which is not uncommon, where the contractor gets to the end and says, oh, by the way, utility wants us to upgrade the line, and it's going to cost you another $50,000 to do that. There's no upfront cash payment with a PPA, and there's no debt on the balance sheet, and no surprise change orders for the system, which we just talked about. There's also no cost of operating expenses. All of that is factored into the cost per kilowatt hour that you pay for the power that's produced by the system. The other advantage is that it stabilizes your energy bills in the sense that in these contracts, you have over the 25 years the stated cost of the energy. So there isn't any surprises like there may be with a utility who decides to increase the cost of your energy by year basis. I noticed that Missouri, I think, is just recently seen some cost increases in energy. In California, we have real issues with that, where the costs have increased between 7 and 12 cents over the last year or so for the utility providers. The one advantage to doing it to developers, that when you do it on a diocesan-wide basis, is it creates this for them to come in and look at the sites and develop them. The scale, in the sense it's a bigger project. There are numerous smaller sites that probably would find it difficult to do the development with energy savings if they weren't lumped in with some of the bigger sites. And that's one of the advantages of doing it that way. And finally, we talked about that, where you reduce internal administration and overhead costs. You reduce the number of contracts, you're simplifying the process for the diocese. EREN is out talking with the developers and working through that process and doing the translation for the diocese. So you don't necessarily have to have either on staff or volunteers that try to follow a multi-year process, usually is what it takes to do all of the sites to get those done. Our experience has been pretty positive. We've had a diocesan-wide development commitment from the bishop on down. We used commercial techniques in terms of the PPA and some of the other aspects of that contract to try to minimize risk and also get good savings for each of the sites. In the first phase, we've completed that, and that's all interconnected. We're done with the second phase, except for 2 sites, which one started construction last week, and we expect to be done by the end of this quarter with both sites. We will be covering 90% of our electrical energy usage over the year, and we're going to be saving more than 10% yearly on that cost. It's about $29,000 per year starting out, and then it balloons up to about a $2 million savings over the life of the PPA. So what are the individual steps? And again, this is kind of the process we used at EDSJ. First, we did a survey of the sites, which is both physical characteristics and energy usage. Physical characteristics is pretty important because that's the other part of it beyond just energy usage, of how you can develop solar on systems on those sites. We took that information out of the survey, did an analysis to determine whether there's any potential savings within the sites, and found that there was, got people to agree to that, and the diocese then moved forward to preparing a memorandum and went to market with that, so that we were talking to multiple developers to see who would be interested in providing that service. We got the responses, did an analysis of them, represented that to the diocese, got their approval to move forward with that particular developer, prepared the documentation, which meant the PPA. The one advantage that you folks have, and actually our PPA has been used a number of times within the Episcopal Church already, but we developed a PPA which we have in-house that gives us quite a head start to be able to work with these developers. And then once the PPA is signed, we do the support for the site approval process. So in the particular process, what would happen is the developer would present what the design was, what the individual pricing is for each site, and that is then presented to the site for approval and agreement. The only thing the site has to agree is that they will pay for that electricity that's being produced by the solar system, which would be the same as if they were buying it from the utility. Then finally, once the process starts, to oversee the developer during implementation. Our current status, we created this entity back on April 30th of last year. We've entered into a memorandum of understanding with the presiding bishop for creation office, where I guess we're kind of the authorized approach to trying to get broad-based renewable energy installed at a Episcopal diocese. And this, I haven't updated this, but we've been in discussions with a number of different dioceses, and actually 2 outside denominations have expressed interest in our program. So in summary, we're a nonprofit that's try to assist parties to get a broad base of renewable energy on their sites. We have a framework to do that within, and we think we have the expertise and knowledge to do that. Ken and Anna, I didn't stop in there. Do you have some things that you'd like to add?
Hi, sorry about that. Yeah, so what I would say is on the level, how this directly impacts our congregations is, and I say this uh, in love and great admiration of those lay leaders and clergy that we have serving our congregations. Um, Most clergy are not trained to know how to deal with developers on this level, right? And I see at least a couple of heads nodding. Um, we learned as we went how to deal with toilets and sprinklers and things like that when we had to, but working with developers on this sort of larger level is sort of out of our area of experience. And also, while we may have really well-meaning lay leaders on our vestries or bishops committees who've had solar installed on their houses, solar installation on your house is a very different idea and process than getting it installed in a group of congregate properties. Okay, it's just a different process, and there's different dynamics at play. And so, what we have found is, for instance, in Bakersfield, our church in Bakersfield, we had some lovely, well meaning people that had had solar installed on their house, and so they knew how to do this and how to get it done, and had one of those parking lot structures, that provides covered parking for people with solar on top. They had that installed at Bakersfield, and when they flipped the switch to make it go, it didn't go. And nobody knew why. Well, it's because they weren't speaking the same language, right? People who do this kind of stuff for our houses, that's a very different concept, as I said, than doing this kind of thing for a church. So they essentially spent a lot of money for a non-working solar system, and they'll never get that money back. And we've had to go through some processes now and his team to help get them solar after the fact, and after having spent money that they had raised. So there's one reason that going in this direction is definitely a positive for our local communities. The other thing is, if you've got solar on your house or know a friend that's got solar on their house, you'll know that sometimes the solar panels get dirty, or there's too much snow. Like, I'm thinking about where you guys are, there's too much snow, and so the solar panels aren't in the most effective way possible. And so what ends up happening is you climb up on the roof or whatever and clean off your solar panels. In this process, the contractors and developers that we work with actually continue to service the solar panels throughout their lifetime. So there's no sending the junior warden up the ladder to go clean off the panels, okay? Or no sending the clergy person up the ladder to clean off the panels. That is not your problem. The other thing is, again, most of our folks are not trained up to have to deal with these sorts of large systems. So in terms of their legwork, like what does this mean if you've got a parish administrator or a volunteer church secretary? What's going to be asked of them? And what's asked of them is that they provide 12 months of utility bills, so that Cal's team can do their work to assess what the benefit will be in terms of cost savings and energy production, right? And if they don't know how to access that, information, that's not a big deal. Cal's team can help walk them through that process. So the impact on the local level is as minimal as we can make it. And that is really so that we can provide the most efficient system, but also the most efficient service to you all on the local level. Cal, back to you.
Okay, well, I think we can open it up to questions at this point.
Please feel free to go ahead and unmute and just ask. There's only 12 or 14 of us, so we're good.
Okay, I'll start with the first silly question then. Ken and Anna, you had talked about those folks that have solar on their house. They're obviously dealing with one utility company. Here in the Diocese of Missouri, we have a huge geographic footprint and probably just as large a footprint within multiple utility companies and co-ops. How does EREN go about helping navigate who gets what energy from where?
So I'm going to actually turn that over to my friend Cal. He does more of that sort of technical stuff, and I talk about how we can support our congregations through this. So Cal, go for it.
Okay, so in the Episcopal Diocese of San Joaquin, we had 4 or 5 different energy providers that were both major utilities like PG&E and Southern California Edison, and we have a lot of minor irrigation districts in the Central Valley who provide energy. So we were able to develop systems in the majority of those sites. To be honest, there was sites where we could not do the development because of the characteristics of that local utility. But other than that, we were able to get to a 90% coverage with multiple different types of utilities. But that is an important consideration as you go through the basic sites and researching the utility that's at that particular.
So then I guess the overarching question then is there a clumping of sites? So those of us that are, say, in the St. Louis area that are all in EREN, Missouri's purview, are we then clumped together as a major site, and therefore we help each other with our electric? And then groups that are, say, out in Southeast Missouri or Northeast Missouri, they're clumped together? I don't know how that's
Okay, so in essence, these are net metering systems, commercial net metering systems, in which case they'd be attached to whatever the utility is that provides the power. And so they wouldn't collectively share any energy per se. They'd have their own site with their own connection to the utility. So you could have multiple different utilities, but because each site, that they go through and how they get paid back for the solar is all individual to that particular site.
I have two questions. So does this have the ability for single phase and 3-phase electric?
Sorry, say that again.
Does this have the ability to output single phase and 3-phase electric?
Yeah, usually they do. And that's the electrical equipment that they end up attaching.
Okay. And my other question, Ken and Anna, can you give, the 2-minute or the elevator speech on what is the difference between house solar panels and church solar panels?
Actually, I'm going to turn that to Cal as well.
Solar panels for houses falls under residential solar, and generally speaking, that's a different category. This is just to begin with, that's a different category within the utility. Secondly, they're usually relatively simple in the sense that they're small systems, they're on the roof, and they use the type of equipment that's associated with residential stuff. Behind me, it's kind of hard to see what that scale is, but you'll see a fairly large array that was in EDSJ. So the commercial systems can be anything from, say, 12,000 watts, which is a very large residential system, up to, and this one is over 200,000 watts. Those have a different scheme within the utility. They usually have robust inverters, and their design is much more robust than you would get from a residential system. Additionally, there are three types of systems that you can see on the commercial side. There are rooftop systems. There are what are called ground mount systems, which are mounted on the ground close by. And then there are shade structures, which is the one that's behind me. Shade structure being the ones that you've commonly seen in parking lots that people drive underneath. The cost to develop those systems escalates from rooftop systems up to shade structures fairly dramatically. So I had an opportunity to look at a number of your different sites. And there appears to be a lot of sites where the opportunity to do rooftop solar on flat top buildings, which is a lot of what we've done at EDSJ, because that's the most cost effective and generates the lowest cost for the electricity generated for those sites. Does that answer your question?
Just as an aside, some people who may not be aware that some of the parishes were kind enough to give us the opportunity to send you their addresses. So you had the
Right.
opportunity to actually examine those with satellite and as well as other things that engineers do. So that's what you're
Yes.
referring to. I'm sorry.
Exactly.
I have a question. To be a good group for this diocese, how many parishes need to be in the PA? And then if the PPA is signed with enough people, enough parishes, what happens if someone wants to join late? Does the contract get adjusted? So the price would the price go down because you added another parish?
Well, the price, let me talk about the pricing for the individual parishes, because adding another parish probably wouldn't impact it much. Each parish has a different pricing. And the reason each parish has a different pricing is because they may have a different utility, which has a different methodology of reimbursement. They may have a different type of structure that's installed. They could have one of those three different types of structures. And so that their pricing per kilowatt hour, which is the general pricing, is going to be specific to them. So generally what we've done, and I think if you think about this as a process, we like to have, say, 20 sites to start with so you can group them a little bit better. But I think starting with 10 or more and thinking about it as a phased process, here's 10 sites, but in discussing with developers, there could be another 10 sites behind it, and another 10 sites after that. That becomes attractive to them. The important characteristics for getting the lowest hour is, one, whatever utility and what the cost of energy is within that utility and what the reimbursement scheme is, the geographic aspects of it. In other words, are you running people all over the area as opposed to having it be concentrated, because it's easier for them, the construction crews, to do it that way. And then finally, do you have a good mix of not only just small sites, which makes it very, very difficult to get people interested, but some big sites mixed with small. So as an example, when we did this large shade structure that you see here, that one was over 200,000 watts. We had a small 12,000 watt system that we installed in one of the sites in Stockton. So we had that kind of breadth so that they could spread their costs, if you will, over different sites.
Just a quick question, sorry, but the churches are using like a little bit of what you're collecting, right? And the rest is going to the developer because he's selling it back to the utility. That's the way it goes?
Well, the way it goes is that the church uses that electricity and it offsets its bill. So if you're producing, let's say, and I'm going to really simplify this, if you're using 80% of what your requirements are, that energy is going to offset 80% of your bill from the utility, and you're going to pay for the 20% addition there. The developer makes his money by the fact that instead of paying the utility for that 80%, you're going to turn around and pay the developer for that 80% at a rate hopefully less than what you would have paid the utility. And that's how these things are generated.
And let me say as well, in terms of churches using utilities, and I'm going to make an assumption here. I'm going to assume that you all have churches that are doing some sort of feeding ministries, right? Soup kitchens, groceries, that sort of stuff, right? Like the good work of the church. We have a couple of places in our diocese where they provide hot meal every day to the unhoused community in their area. Okay, a hot sit-down meal. The cost of running the refrigerators and the commercial grade freezers and the stoves and all the things that it takes to make a ministry like that happen was actually greater than what their income as a congregation is. So they were beginning to have conversations about long-term sustainability. Do we continue to feed the people that God has put before us? Do we continue to be the people that are the only resource in town? Or do we stop this ministry so that we can save ourselves? Okay, that is an impossible choice. So because we have gone this route with solar, that has eliminated that impossible choice for them. Their electricity bills in the long run are going to come down so significantly that it doesn't outweigh the income that they get off of their congregation tithes and pledges and open plate. Okay, we don't want any of our churches, and especially as we're faced with the reality of church decline and aging populations, and yet the need for the church in the community continues to go up, right? We don't want any church to be faced with that impossible decision, right? So this isn't just how do we make this easier for ourselves as the church, and how are we good stewards of God's creation? This is also about the ways in which we care for those that God puts before us to do ministry with. And I think that sometimes we can get so obsessed about the number at the bottom line that we forget the people that this is directly impacting if we don't make this shift. Sorry, Cal, I'll give it back to you.
Just to piggyback on that, I think we also have to remember that the presentation is being made through the Creation Care Ministry. And there is the aspect of solar power beginning to help us reduce our use of fossil fuels. which is having a significant impact on places like Missouri and California. I know what's been going on in California leads the news when it comes to weather. And, we also hear about what's going on down in the Southwest with this incredible drought. 40 million people depend upon the Colorado River for water. And if they end up with no water whatsoever, we're going to have something called inward migration in the United States. Where does 40 million people go? Well, guess what? We have two things called the Mississippi and the Missouri, which are freshwater sources. And we have to actually really take into consideration the long-term effect of us getting off of fossil fuels. Thus ends the sermon. What other questions do you have?
Have any real world pricing data you can share with us that might be helpful? And the reason I ask that is it seems like this is a very beneficial program for churches to get solar panels and everything installed because the upfront cost isn't there and everything. Just in my head, it seems like this is a really kind of break even, maybe you save a little bit of money, which is still okay considering we'd be making greener energy. For our parish, our energy comes from a plant that's natural gas. So I mean, you have pollutants, you have all that good stuff. So it'd be nice if we could use solar to make that. I'm just wondering, how much savings would we actually see? And I guess that kind of depends on what the developer's rate would be versus what our electric rate is. But I don't know if you might have any real world data you could share with us.
Well, I can share, and this is not necessarily applicable to Missouri, but you can think about it this way. When we did the solar systems for EDSJ, we expect to save $29,000 the first year. Now, that was $29,000, assuming that PG&E wasn't going to raise the rates again, which they've done, which means we're actually probably saving more. That's $29,000, which is around 13 or 14% of the total cost for the diocese. The actual savings individual sites varies within that range. There are some that are less than the 13, 14%, and there's some that are more than that. A lot of it depends on a couple of things, one of which is their utilization, particularly and this would be probably true in Missouri too, time of use, when the large draw of energy and when the large production is. And the second thing is whether they had to have an expensive style installation. As an example, we have a National Historic Landmark Church, or EDSJ does, in Sonora, California. There was no way we were going to install panels on that one to have a ground mount system in a lot that was near where they were. So those savings kind of range across that basis. If you look at the if you look at the EDSJ development, it was it's valued at around $2 million, and it's supposed to save that's what the cost is in order to build all those systems. There are 11 systems to cover 12 sites, and they're projected to save over a very conservative estimate of escalation of utility costs. They're projected to save over a 25-year life, $2 million. So it's pretty substantial. We would like to see that there are savings for every individual site. So far, we've been able to achieve that. And, we're not going to know what those actual savings are until you do the work of gathering not only the information about what the total utilization is by site, but also what that curve looks like. In other words, when do you use it? Is it all on the weekends? Is it during the week? Do you have these ancillary services that Ken and Anna is talking about? Because we had a number of sites that had those kinds of services, which require day in and day out energy, which actually helps in terms of them, because the system ended up being a lot bigger than you would have thought of. We have some very small real estate footprints that have some relatively large systems on them because of that. So
yeah, that definitely helps. And I don't want that I didn't want that question to maybe seem discouraging. I think even if we broke even, I think it's definitely still well worth pursuing. And then the only other caveat to that question is, so let's say the system generates more than what our usage was. Let's say it generates 110, 120%.
right.
And, because that's way more than we probably ever would, right?
Right.
But let's say it did that. Do we see cost savings there too, or do we see that because we had to pay it, or I just don't know how that billing works if we generate more than what we used.
Yeah, so let's say generally the way that works is that, let's say they're charging you 12 cents per kilowatt hour to take power off the system that they built. And let's say the utility, which generally this is true, pays you called avoided cost for excess power. That's usually in the range of 3 cents to 8 or 9 cents. And you can see that if you overbuild your system, you're generating a loss as you go along. Now, having said all of that, we have people in California, and you may think about this too, is that electrical vehicles are going to elements, the shift to more devices that use electrical energy away from natural gas, like heaters and things like that, that will begin to use more energy. And so some people will build a slightly larger system than what they could currently support if they think they're going to be installing that stuff real soon to do that. So, I mean, there are cases to be made for slightly more energy, but speaking, it's not a good idea.
Understood. Yeah, because we have residential solar panels. So I mean, we get those credits back when we generate more, but it's also obviously a lot different way of paying and all that good stuff. So I was just curious about that. But okay.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, but when you get your credit back on your residential, even though it might be different in commercial, those credits for excess energy production are pretty low, are they not?
Correct. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
But obviously so there's months during the summer in our rural property where we have the solar panels out, and we make $20-$30 instead of paying a bill.
Right.
Obviously.
Right.
So, I was just curious if you ever make, so I guess it makes sense to bring in somebody who really knows what they're talking about so they can kind of be right on the money with your needs and things like that. So that's good.
Right. You need to, the people that are involved in the process, and, we talk to the developers, we try to get somebody who's experienced at doing this, know how to model these systems so that they can get the best pricing possible out of the particular system. And that's a matter of fitting what your needs are to it based on the reimbursement rates of the utility.
I have a question. Is it possible to become energy independent using this? And how long would that take?
That would take some time. And when you say energy independent, I assume you're saying, what if we were to cover 100% of all of our electrical needs and not be connected to the grid?
Well, almost. Not sure I'd want to be disconnected from the grid, but yeah.
Well, you can get close to 100% as long as it makes economic sense, or if you make a decision that I want to cover 100% of my requirements, regardless of what it's going to cost me, you could do that now. But it's going to be more expensive then trying to find the optimum solution that will save you some money and won't cause you to have to come out of pocket for some additional costs. And the reason for that is that, you know, solar is doesn't produce much in the wintertime. It overproduces in the summer, and those have to be matched up with whatever your utilizations are. I would imagine you guys all have a fairly high need for air conditioning in the summer. So, I mean, that's going to be high utilization, probably not so much in the winter. I mean, even though you have lights, it's not gonna, they don't use that much, so.
I would concur with that. I have an all-electric house, and our electric bills are highest during the summer, not in the winter.
Right.
Ours is the opposite. Ours is much higher in the winter because we have electric heat down in the farm that we use the solar panels at. So yeah, we go from like getting, you know, $20 back a month in the summer to paying like $300 a month in the winter.
So if the solar panels weren't producing enough in the winter, you just connect to the grid. That's
right.
Be the redundant backup. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, that's the backup.
Yeah.
The idea of installing batteries, which still may be, you still may want to install a battery or so with the solar system, is coming down in price. It's becoming a lot more common, particularly in California. But you couldn't buy enough batteries to really kind of support you through the winter time.
Like, could you buy
well,
enough
you could.
battery?
Sorry.
Could you buy enough battery backup to, if you power outage, because connecting to the grid won't work if it's not working.
Right. Generally speaking, it's still, you can get by, but if you have anything like what Ken and Anna was talking about, where you have thousands of dollars of food that's in freezers and you have a power outage in the middle of the summer, you can't, you wouldn't be able to, it would be too costly to install the batteries. What you would have would be generator backup for the thing. The cost of batteries is coming down, but it's still not there yet.
When we would be evaluated and the people, EREN would come to us and say, okay, these are what your current needs are. Do they project then on needs changing? You know, right now we have a gas hot water heater, we have gas furnaces. So I would assume that moving forward, we would possibly, especially because we use so little hot water, that we would move into an electric hot water heater. Would they take into account if we make those types of changes as well, or you know, or would the system be able to grow with us with those types of
yeah, there's some possibility it could grow and you could have some additional panels put on. We've had those individual conversations with various sites to ask them, you know, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. So you think about your plan. I would say if it's three years or out, it probably is not something you could necessarily incorporate, that it's part of your plan. And once you get to that, then you would work to try to get that covered by upgrading the system. Same thing's true of, you know, I don't know how soon you guys are going to be moving to EVs, but those could be a fairly large draw on electricity and can really drive up the usage if you have that.
The way the automotive manufacturers are going, EVs are on our right over the, well, it's not our future, it's our now.
Right. It's becoming quite widespread. You know, there's a lot of programs in California to install EV chargers along the way. They're trying to get electrify all thoroughfares, the main highways.
Mm-hmm. I live in a town of 4,700 people, and down the road there's a Walmart, and you pull in the parking lot at Walmart, and there's a 4-station EV charging station right there.
Yep, pretty commonplace. Richard, you have
Yes,
your hand up?
I do. Thank you. Couple of things that I know that what Kevin just mentioned. It's interesting to me that in Ironton, which is a very small rural community, at the Save-A-Lot store, there is 4 Ameren charging stations. But in Farmington, which is a much larger city or town, but still rural, I don't know of any installed electric vehicle charging stations, which I just find really ironic, considering the town of Farmington is supposed to be so progressive. The other thing that I really said was the idea that, because I'm the part-time vicar for 2 churches. The one in Ironton is a very old church, and it has a lot of systems that have been in place for a while that would be looking like, you know what, like the idea of switching over from a gas hot water heater, which would be way more energy efficient, to go to a newer electric model than what we got, or even the furnaces in the house and the churches, just in a 5-year period. It's yeah, these probably should be replaced anyway because they're so old and they're inefficient. Whereas the church in Farmington was built in 2008, all fairly new stuff. It's all electric. And the funny thing with that church, our electric bill in the winter is way more expensive because they're heating this huge space. Which is where I have my issues with the architects when they built that building. But I was a mere thought at that point in that congregation. But anyway, but
Okay.
I think there's a lot of interesting. I'd be curious. I'm really curious, and I'm really interested in knowing, when they look at these 2 sites that I'm looking at, that I'm working with, how different the arrays will be, because All Saints sits on 5 acres of property with a huge new slanted roof, but it has a lot of ground surface to work with. Whereas the 150-year-old church building, which is historic, where we could never put an array on that one, that has a smaller footprint in a neighborhood, how that would look, if it's even possible. Which
one was that? Is that the St. Paul's?
St. Paul's is the historic one in the small rural town.
Yeah.
It's on a smaller footprint. So that would be
well, I've got a question on my part after looking at it as to which buildings are on the campus and which buildings aren't. Are there some buildings that you guys own that are right adjacent to the church?
So we have, there's a house right next to the church, will be north of the church, I guess. And then there's a community garden lot. So that community garden lot we're in a relationship with the county extension office. We may be able to work with that and see how that there could be some rethinking there.
Well, there's always, shade structures in the parking lot, but that could get very expensive. But I looked at the 2 you're talking about, and for the one in Farmington, the possible roof and ground mount for that location. So
I'll take my hand down now. Thank you.
We're looking at about 5 minutes to 5, and we had originally talked about an hour. And I want to be mindful of Cal and Kevin time. So is there any other questions? Going once, going twice. And what I think I'll do is I think I will just thank both of you very much for being here this afternoon and giving us a lot of information based upon the questions that it appears to me that some folks have really put their wrapped their minds around this issue and are very excited about it. I know that we are in the Creation Care Ministry, and I know the bishop is as well. Just remind everybody that in the state of Missouri, 70% of all of our energy produced in this state is produced with fossil fuel coal. So anytime you can go ahead and put a solar panel on anything, you're actually reducing the use of coal, which is basically choking the planet to death.
And just
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
just as a quick aside, with the new federal law, the Inflation Reduction Act, there are some potential additional incentives that these sites might have. I don't have the final maps for it, but the fact that coal is used a lot in Missouri, there may be some sites that go beyond just the 30% ITC. So you have an advantage of that. I'd also like to thank everybody for allowing us to spend the time to talk to you about this. And, we're pretty excited. We'd like to get started. So hopefully we can.
So would we. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be talking with the bishop's office and the chancellor's office about next steps. I'd like to keep, Canon Anna and you, Cal, both in the loop as to what our next steps are, because I'm pretty certain that we're going to be moving forward. Quite certain we're going to be moving forward with this entire program. And this particular program that you made today is very, very helpful. Really appreciate it.
There's any questions that come up afterwards, don't hesitate to send us an email.
Okay. And I'll just remind everybody, we've recorded this, and I should